Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into something really interesting.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Today we're going to be looking at Osho's perspective on how to handle difficult emotions.
Yeah, Osho, he's definitely got some interesting things to say about all that stuff.
He really turns the whole good vibes only thing on its head.
Yeah, he really does. We're always told to focus on the positive, right? But Osho, he suggests that pushing down those so-called negative emotions, like anger and sadness, he says it actually does more harm than good.
So instead of resisting those emotions, he's saying we should just, accept them.
Yeah, basically. It sounds kind of crazy at first, right? Because we're like conditioned to just try to avoid those feelings at all costs.
Yeah, it's way easier said than done.
Totally. But Osho's point is that those emotions are just as natural as, breathing or eating or anything else. We don't try to suppress those things.
That's true.
And he argues that when we try to deny these emotions, they don't really go away. They just kind of fester under the surface.
Yeah, they're just bottled up, waiting to explode.
Exactly. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can keep pushing it down, but eventually it's going to pop back up with even more force.
Right, so it's not actually making the problem go away. It's just delaying the inevitable explosion.
Exactly. And in the meantime, all that pushing and suppressing creates a ton of inner conflict and tension.
It's exhausting. No wonder we're all so stressed out all the time.
Right. Who needs that? Osho was all about, radical acceptance. He said the path to real peace and well-being is through, totally owning and accepting all parts of ourselves, even the messy bits.
Okay, so how do we even begin to do that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Because it's not like we can just flip a switch and suddenly be okay with feeling all the feels all the time.
Definitely not. It's a process, for sure. And it's definitely a different way of thinking about things.
All right, so where do we even begin? Where do we start with this whole accepting our difficult emotions thing? Because I got to be honest, it kind of sounds terrifying.
Well, Osho would probably say that the first step is to just notice those emotions when they come up without judgment, just observe them. He called this process witnessing.
Witnessing. Okay, now you're just using big words to try to sound smart.
Hey, I resemble that.
No, but seriously, witnessing is it's like becoming an observer of your own thoughts and feelings, kind of like you're watching a movie.
Okay, so instead of getting totally swept away by a wave of anxiety, for example, I'm just noticing it, acknowledging it.
Exactly. You're not trying to stop it or change it or judge it. You're just saying, oh, hey there, anxiety. I see you.
Interesting. So how does just noticing our emotions actually help? I mean, they're still there, right?
They are. But here's the thing. When you can create a little bit of space between you and the emotion, you're less likely to get totally consumed by it.
So instead of feeling like I'm drowning in a sea of anxiety, I'm learning to surf. I like that analogy. That's a good way to put it. It's about learning to ride those waves rather than getting crushed by them. And that's what we're going to unpack more when we come back.
Stay tuned, everybody. All right, so we're back and ready to, really get into this whole witnessing thing.
Yeah, let's dig a little deeper.
Because I'll be honest, it still sounds kind of, I don't know, mystical and out there. How do I actually witness my emotions? What does that even look like in real life?
Okay, so imagine this. You're walking down a super crowded street, right?
Okay, got it.
And there's tons of noise, people bumping into you, traffic whizzing by. It's kind of overwhelming.
Been there.
So with witnessing, you're not trying to stop the chaos or make it go away. You're just sort of tuning into it, noticing the sounds, the sights, the energy of it all without letting it totally take over.
So instead of freaking out about how loud and crowded it is, I'm just observing it. Okay, I hear that siren. I see that pigeon trying to steal that guy's sandwich. I feel someone's backpack brush against my leg.
Exactly. You're just acknowledging what is without getting all caught up in your own, mental commentary about it.
And it's the same with our emotions. If I'm feeling super anxious, I'm not trying to fight it or ignore it. I'm just oh, hey there. Anxiety. I see you hanging out in my chest, making my heart race.
You got it. And the important thing is you're not judging it, right? You're not saying, oh, anxiety, you're so bad, you shouldn't be here, go away. You're just acknowledging its presence.
Huh. So instead of letting the anxiety take over and send me into a total spiral, I can just sort of observe it from a distance.
Exactly. And that's where the magic happens. Because when you can create that little bit of distance, you realize that you are not your emotions.
It's oh, okay, I'm feeling anxious, but that doesn't mean I am anxiety.
Yes, you are the one observing the anxiety. And that realization, that shift in perspective can be incredibly powerful.
I can see that. But how does that actually help me feel less anxious?
Like
Oh,
it's still there, right?
yeah.
It is. But here's the thing about emotions. They're like waves. They rise up, they have their moment, and then they crash and recede back into the ocean.
Okay. I like that.
But when we're not used to feeling our emotions, when we haven't learned how to just be with them, we tend to do everything we can to avoid that wave.
We try to outrun it, or we build walls to try to block it, or we grab onto something and try to hold on for dear life.
Exactly. And all that resisting, it just makes the wave bigger and stronger. But when we can learn to just ride the wave, to trust that it will eventually
It's a
pass.
much smoother ride.
Exactly. And we might even enjoy the view along the way.
All right, so we've talked about witnessing our emotions, learning to observe them without getting totally swept away.
Yeah.
But what about actually expressing those emotions? I mean, it's not exactly healthy to keep everything bottled up inside, right?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And Osho actually had a lot to say about this too. He was all about finding healthy ways to express those emotions, but not in the way you might think.
Okay, so he's not saying we should just go around unleashing our inner rage monsters on everyone.
Uh-huh. No, definitely not. Osho was all about conscious expression. He made a clear distinction between suppression, like pushing those emotions down and pretending they don't exist, and finding healthy outlets for that emotional energy.
So what did he suggest we do instead of like, you know, exploding on our boss or something?
Well, he actually believed that meditation could be a really powerful tool for emotional expression.
Meditation, really? I thought meditation was all about like finding stillness and quieting the mind, which, don't get me wrong, sounds amazing, but I don't see how that helps me get all this stuff off my chest.
Right. You'd think so, but Osho actually developed some really unique meditation techniques that were specifically designed to help people move through and release pent-up emotions.
Like dynamic meditation, I've heard a little bit about that.
Exactly. Dynamic meditation is amazing. It involves movement, shaking, cathartic breathing, even shouting sometimes, all in a safe and controlled environment, of course. It's basically giving yourself permission to just let it all out.
Wow, that does sound kind of liberating.
It really is. It's like, imagine you've been holding your breath underwater for way too long and then you finally come up for air. That's kind of what it feels like to release those stuck emotions.
So it's not just about getting rid of those negative emotions, it's about actually learning from them.
Exactly. Remember we were talking earlier about emotions being like messengers? Well, Osho believed that they could also be our greatest teachers.
Interesting. So how does that work?
Well, let's take anger as an example,
Yeah.
right? Anger often gets a bad rap, and understandably so, it can be a very destructive force. But Osho would say that if we can learn to sit with our anger, to really witness it without judgment, to allow it to move through us, it can actually transform into clarity and insight.
So instead of fearing anger, we can use it as a catalyst for growth.
Precisely. Because often underneath that anger, there's a message trying to get our attention. Maybe it's a boundary that's been crossed, or a value that's been compromised, or a need that's not being met. And once you understand the root of that anger, you can actually use that energy to create positive change in your life.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's really about shifting our perspective, right? Instead of seeing these difficult emotions as enemies, we can see them as opportunities. Opportunities to learn, to grow, to evolve.
Exactly. And, that applies to all emotions, not just anger. Like fear, for instance. Fear can be paralyzing, right?
Tell me about it.
But Osho would say that fear can also be an incredible motivator for growth. Because when we face our fears head on, we often discover this, like hitting reservoir of courage and resilience that we never even knew we had.
Wow, I love that. So how do we actually start to put all of this into practice?
Well, that's where all those different meditation techniques that Osho developed come into play. Whether it's dynamic meditation, kundalini meditation, laughter meditation, there's so many different techniques. But they all have the same goal, which is to help us cultivate a sense of inner stillness and awareness.
So it's about finding that space within ourselves where we can just be with whatever arises without letting it control us.
Yes. And it's not about, like, becoming emotionless robots, right?
Definitely not.
It's about learning to ride the waves of our emotions, all of them, the highs and the lows, without getting swept away.
Yeah.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
And I love that Osho emphasized the importance of joy and playfulness in all of this, because it's not all serious introspection and deep inner work, right?
Right. He believed that life should be a celebration, and that includes embracing the difficult emotions as part of that dance. Because it's all part of the journey, isn't it?
It really is. Well, that was incredible. I feel like we've covered so much ground today.
We We really have. And I hope that our listeners will walk away from this conversation with a little more understanding about Osho's perspective and maybe even a little more compassion for themselves and their own emotional experiences.
Yes, absolutely. So as you go about your day-to-day, try this little experiment. The next time you feel a difficult emotion bubbling up, don't try to push it away or ignore it. Just take a moment to simply notice it, acknowledge it,
Yeah.
and then ask yourself, what if this emotion could be my teacher? What is it trying to show me?
You might be surprised by what you discover.
Thanks for joining us on another deep dive. We'll see you next time.